So you may have just heard my computer talking with my own voice back to myself. But we are streaming this event. I don't know if you can all see that. It is an official Code for America CodeAcross event. So if you go to the Code for America website and you scroll down to the long list of all the cities in the country that are doing a CodeAcross today and a couple other days this weekend, you'll see that Fairfax is listed. And it's actually all of Marin is represented here. It's kind of how we were billing this event, is that it would be for the entire county. So I'm going to try to quickly explain all the things that need to be explained and then start with our panelists who have joined us today. Thank you guys for being here. My name is Scott Calhoun. I work for the Community Media Center of Marin, and I do the education and government relations and development and things like that. And this organization, Code for Marin, started about a month or two ago. Actually, it's been in the works before that, but we didn't start having CodeFest till early January. But we really just want to start the conversation about open data, what that is, how it could be used, how it could be useful, what are the best practices, what have other cities done. Those are the kinds of questions that we're interested in answering, asking ourselves, bringing different experts in different sectors together who may not usually be in close contact. And this event is really just to build the awareness about open data and to answer your questions and to kind of get things percolating and see what there's an appetite for and what the various institutions would be open to, and what's the first step and what's the second step and things like that. In case you want to have internet connection, we did get Wi-Fi wrestled into this building, and the information is on that pamphlet over there. It's lowercase, no spaces, but you can see the Wi-Fi and password. And we will have a public comment time where I'll pass the mic over, and whoever wants to ask a question to our panel or just tell us about something that they think is important and not to be overlooked, we will open it up to public comment after we've heard as much as our panel wants to tell us about. So with that, I think we could just go down the line and each panelist introduce themselves. And then I've got a list of questions that we've compiled, and I'll just say a question, and whoever feels like they want to take it and run with it, and I'm hoping, the conversations kind of bloom from there. So why don't we start with Yo? Hello? Oh, it was on already.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So press it again.
Sorry about that. So my name is Yo Yoshida. I am the founder of Appalicious, an open data civic startup based in San Francisco. We do data visualization in multiple capacities, working in partnership with government. We work with everyone from the White House to FEMA to San Francisco and some of the surrounding communities around here. We started about 5 years ago, around the time the Obama administration created an executive order to open up data, and then Gavin Newsom in San Francisco adopted it, and we saw an opportunity to create better products, engage citizens better, and work with government and empower people using data to make informed decisions.
My name's Trent Boshin. I'm with the County of Marin Department of Health and Human Services in the Technical Services Group, and I like to think of myself as a DevOps guy, development and operations. I'll do things like fix that mouse that's not working, but then I also run a fleet of Linux servers and do a lot of Drupal-based development along with other open source tools. I'm kind of a code monkey. I'll grab scripts that people have written and make them work for our organization's needs, which includes all of you.
Hi, I'm Eddie Tejeda, and I was a Code for America fellow in 2012. We built a project called Blight Status to track vacant abandoned homes in the city. And that project has spun off to now be a startup that works with cities across the country to work with their housing data called Civic Insight. I am also the co-founder of Open Oakland, which is essentially the equivalent of Code for Marin in the city of Oakland, where we work closely with the city to help pass open data policies and visualizations for campaign finance. We work very closely with them. And I also serve on the Public Ethics Commission for the city of Oakland.
Hello, my name is Kate Collin, and I'm on the San Rafael City Council. And I've been very interested in creating and improving resident engagement, which is how I've come to learn more about open data, and really trying to figure out how we involve residents in any initiative or project way ahead of when it's at the city council level. In addition to that, it's transparency. Often there is a belief that things are happening behind closed doors, which I haven't seen that, but I think it really reflects the fact that people aren't sure how decisions are made. And how can we communicate that? I have a marketing background, and so I'm very interested in how we interact with each other and how we communicate, and ultimately, how do we create a stronger and a more reflective democracy of our community. So I'm very excited to be here today and to learn from these gentlemen and from all of you.
Thanks, Kate. As you can see from their introductions, we tried to balance it between developers, makers, technologists, but also elected officials and staff for the different various municipalities, because Marin is made up of a lot of different small towns and cities, and it's different than a lot of other areas. And this is, one of the first things focusing on open data where those two strata of people can talk to each other about something like this in a really focused way. So this is just a great opportunity, and I want to launch right into it. So my first question is, what is open data? And if someone came in and is like, what are they talking about? What is open data? Maybe we could work on a little loose definition between the four of us here.
Want to get it? All right. So I'm kind of an open data evangelist as well, and I've been in the space since pretty much the inception of the movement in the United States has really started taking root. Open data is any data that is created by, it can be from government to individuals to social media, and has the ability to be able to access by the public in some form or capacity. And it's kind of it's not, and one of the myths about data and opening data is personal information. That is not what we're talking about here, just to make a very clear delineation between, what your private personal data and your health data is not part of this conversation. This is stuff like, where are your park benches? Where are your facilities? Where are your traffic patterns? Different data sets that exist that have been sitting in the annals of different government offices have been collecting it for years. We, the taxpayers, have been paying for this data, and now with new policies are being able to access this and use it to make informed decisions. That's my start.
Anyone want to add on to that, augment that at all?
My simplification is open data is data that any one of us can get to. It may be raw, or it may already be shaped in a way that any one of us could read it.
Yeah, those are both very, very accurate. Just to add another element to it, I think there's a component which is data that you could request through, say, California's Public Records Request Act, where there's a lot of information that government produces that the public is already entitled to. But I think there's a shift towards being more proactive about making a lot of this information that exists internally available online in a way that's consumable by other applications and by other systems. So the idea is bringing out a lot of this value that's already inside City Hall and making it available for the public, for them to be able to make smarter decisions.
Great. And my next question is, what is so great about open data that we should care? And I think Eddie started talking about it a little bit, but We might even go into like a specific application that we know about. Maybe somebody knows how open data was just a thing, and then it got real specific somewhere, and it had a good effect. So what's so great about open data?
Well, I mean, we can start with the history, right? So going back to, and this is something that all us open data always start everything with, is Ronald Reagan opened up post a disaster with a Korean airliner being blown out of the sky because they didn't know where they were relative to where Russian airspace was. So Ronald Reagan and the military at that time had GPS. He said, let's open up GPS, we'll open the data, let companies create industry out of that, so that incidents like this will never happen again, and the private sector will be able to know where they are. Thus, you have everyone here has it in their phones, they have it in devices, and that is pretty much the inception and concept behind open data, and now it's being applied across multiple sectors.
That's a great example. That's a definite good thing that open data did.
On the theoretical level, open data means that somebody who wouldn't otherwise have the means can have the means to foster change that is better for people or otherwise, but it means that it can help conversations broaden, include more elements, and get more specific about things that everybody generally doesn't know about.
And I'd be happy to add to that. It's not just focusing on results, it's actually focusing on someone's experience. There's an example that I've read about in this book that often government workers have a task that they need to do. And so let's say it's emptying trash cans, and that's supposed to represent how clean the area is. Well, no, actually, we'd actually like to find out how are people's experience in that park, for example. Does it feel cleaner to them? So it's kind of a shift in terms of the way that people view their job, I think, because you can have access to that data. The other part is, as was mentioned, it flattens it out more. So it's not just someone who can come to a meeting and make a comment and say, well, I think. You both have the data that might indicate a solution, but it also broadens that platform and brings in more voices to the conversation.
You know, I think there's another component here, which is that I've seen in my experience, that often the biggest benefits come from, or the biggest beneficiaries are actually people within government who otherwise data would be locked in different departments or within different jurisdictions. So say parcel information, it could be owned by the assessor's office, but this is information that FEMA could make use of during a recovery of, during Katrina, for example. Or there are just a lot of different organizations that depend on this information within the city or within different government agencies, that otherwise you create these barriers that can become very, very cumbersome over time and take a toll. And I think in terms of the experience that I've seen with open data is that the city themselves or the local governments themselves tend to be the biggest beneficiaries of making data available.
Wonderful. Next question is, what are some misconceptions that you guys may have come across in your talking about open data with people? Has anyone ever misconceived of what it was, and what was that story?
Yeah, so we created a number of products, and in San Francisco, we partner with Department of Public Health on creating the first comprehensive neighborhood score, taking in everything from pedestrian safety to air quality, cancer risk, all of these factors that created this kind of first metrics around the actual score, scientific data, using scientific data to measure your neighborhood. Misconceptions all the way from government offices all the way down to the individual citizens and the neighborhoods were, we were attacking, or it was being used as a tool to attack certain individuals. The data, some of it would be confidential, like police data, which none of that, again, going back to my statement before, this isn't about your personal information. These are statistics and numbers and data sets that exist without any individual entity related to it. And you know, and I'm working right now in the disaster space, and you know, something that's being misconceived is, you know, we're trying to work with the vulnerable and post-disaster, pre-disaster, post-disaster scenarios, where are senior citizens, those types of data sets, senior centers, schools, all of the child care facilities, mapping those out, digitizing them, taking all those different data sets. And a lot of people are feeling like we're revealing things that shouldn't be revealed. And there's nothing that's not already, when you can drive down the street, you can see these things for yourself. We're just taking them and put them in a way so that you can make an educated decision or educated view of what's going on, and capturing that. So from my standpoint, it's a lot of fear around what sort of data sets might be released, and that was again a police thing. We don't want people to know, or the neighborhood saying we don't want people to know, but they already knew. And when we released these things, people were like, wow, yes, now we have a metric, now we can move that measure forward, or we have a weakness here, let's move that forward. So it comes in waves of a lot of fear and just not education on what open data actually is.
Any other misconceptions that you've run into?
Well, I completely agree with that, but to take from a slightly different angle, I think that there are also misconceptions that if you open up data, that suddenly everything will become, you know, apps and magic will come together and all your problems will be solved. And that's not the case either. It's I think having an understanding that it's a long-term play. For example, that the benefits might not be, it might not change your job tomorrow, but over time, as more people have better information, are more informed, and as more people start thinking about how they can use this data in different ways, that has a lasting effect on the way in which the public interacts with city staff, for example. So I think that understanding that it is important for a lot of this data to be released, but also to have reasonable expectations of what is going to happen in the time frame, I think is a really I see misconceptions on both ends on that front.
Yeah.
I think the only other misconception I'd add on a much broader scale is that it doesn't have to be dealt with. Like, oh, we don't need to deal with open data because we're too busy doing this, that, and the other. That there's a belief that it won't affect our little city. I'm not speaking for San Rafael, but just speaking for jurisdictions, saying, you know what, no, we're good, thanks. You know, we don't want to go down that path. And I really believe that this is a tool that cities want to embrace and will be embracing no matter what going forward. It's not going to be an option. As the way that we communicate and the way that we use data and the way we make decision changes, this will be a part of it.
Yeah.
So to think that it's an option, I think is being short-sighted.
Yeah, it's being spoken about in more progressive cities as infrastructure. This is truly the future of infrastructure and how you're going to make decisions moving forward. And you know, it becomes very relevant in every capacity. McKinsey did a study last year, and it was believed the impact of open data on the global economy was going to be $3.5 trillion in the next five years. So the relevance financially, business, and the local economies is scales internationally by, you know, a trillionfold.
The misconception I see, and I work for Health and Human Services, so almost every piece of data I touch is protected under HIPAA, meaning there's personal health information in it. And what I see is a lot of fear internally about what the open data structure means, but as soon as people see it in action, so two different teams that never had access to the same data can share a same interface to it, that fear starts to vanish because they see the system in place and they see how that information can be protected, that needs to be protected, while other information becomes readily available and quickly displayed in ways that make sense to them.
We may have touched on it a little already, but one of my questions is about how do we safeguard sensitive information that is becoming open, and how do we, is it like all or nothing? You know, if there's one little half of a sentence that said something that was sensitive, does the whole 50 pages get, you know, not accessible to the public? Or how do we determine what we can make open data and what stays personal and because it is sensitive?
Well, actually, just for a clear guide on this, Code for America, the Open Knowledge Foundation, and the Sunlight Foundation have created a grid of key data sets. I'll get the name exactly of the website, I forget exactly what it is, but a grid of all the key data sets that every city should publish or every local government should publish. So whether it's street names or parcel information, they provide a good foundation. I think outside of that, I think there really needs to be a conversation about whether or not what's the value of this information. I think that it becomes, there are some gray areas, and there have been some examples, for example, that can confuse exactly whether or not open data, the impact of open data. For example, there was this story a few months ago, maybe a few years ago now, where a journalist mapped, on the map, put the addresses and little points of every gun owner in the area. And that caused a lot of debate there and wondering what's the purpose? What is this doing? Is this potentially creating targets or of people? And this was also during a time when gun control was being discussed. I think Sandy Hook or something like that just happened. So it became a big, complicated discussion about what was the point of publishing this data and making this map available to the public at that time. And I think that's, I don't know if there's a clear answer to that. And I think that those are the kinds of friction is a real, adds a level of delay on certain kinds of data sets that might be sensitive, even though they are technically open. So I think for a clear guide, check out the map created by Open Knowledge Foundation and Sunlight. But I think outside of that, I think there's still a lively discussion going on about whether or not it's relevant or how it can be used in different areas.
And I'll just butt in real quick. I was looking at this site earlier today, sunlightfoundation.com, and then / open data guidelines. I think is the one. I think that's the one that Eddie's referring to. Any other things that?
I mean, it's a policy thing, right? It's looking at what's existing out there. Europe has some of the strictest guidelines to the point where it's becoming an inhibiting in a lot of ways for the use of the data. And then corporations are having. I mean, it's trying to find the best model, and we're still in the infancy of this industry, this sector of the policy making of it. So we have to kind of experiment and see and for my side, which is a company, I'm looking at everything from a responsible citizen and a responsible business, and working with the government and agencies and finding what we would think wouldn't be something that we would want to expose or should expose. Obviously the HIPAA stuff, never want to expose that, but when you start getting into that gray area, as he was just talking about, it has to be made now as a responsible decision, and we are still working through this process. There's legislation being written up right now at the state level, and they're still trying to figure out at the national level how to best, because most of this, a lot of it is I would say 90% of the data is useless as far as attacking anyone personally or anything else. It's that last 10%, and we are working towards trying to find solutions or best practices moving forward, which will hopefully be adopted into policy.
Okay, so moving on from there, shifting a little bit, how should the public be involved in approaching open data? And I should say one of the goals of Code for Marin is to one is to have a Code for America fellow be based here and working on something in Marin that would benefit us, And another of our goals was to have an open data policy. No timeline for these things, obviously, yet. This is all very much still in its infancy. So how should the public be involved in that process of having a relationship with open data before we get a Code for America Fellow and before we have a policy adopted?
I'll take a stab. I'm sure my answer might be a different angle than these three gentlemen. Elected officials respond to our constituents and to our residents and to what people want. So the public's role is very clear. It's saying this is something that's important to us and making themselves known either through contacting their elected officials, either via email or in person, but letting them know that this is a priority, because for any jurisdiction, large or small, it comes down to a matter of resources. It's either people internally or the infrastructure to have that created. And before any public dollars are spent, we need to know that that's something that the public wants. And so it's raising the conversations. It's having events like this. And so, a year from now, maybe this room would be completely full because the conversation's been started and people start to understand the role that it can be. So for me, it's always comes from the people in our community saying, this is important to us and this is why.
And let me just add something onto that, because you're completely correct there. And from the business side again, is looking at it as going to your city officials and saying open data, looking at a pain point in your community, whether it be traffic, whether, I'll use the example because Boston's under snow right now, right? Code for America had this brilliant idea, or the group within Code for America, that the community and the fire department had these pain points where they didn't know where the fire hydrants were after major snowstorms, so they did adopt a fire hydrant. That's a open data set. Where the potholes are, those are data sets. So if you have a problem within your community, usually there is some sort of data solution, and that could be the first foray, because going up and saying, I want an open data policy, and they're like, well, what is that? But saying, I have a problem with potholes all over our community, we should be mapping them out and figuring out a more efficient way or faster way to respond and fix those, and that would be your foray into using data for some sort of solution.
My insider's perspective in the County of Marin's Health and Human Services Department is the public needs to, or a member of the public needs to be ready to move slowly. And by slowly, I mean there's a lot of care taken. There are more and more people brought into the discussion, and they have different points to bring to it. So it's a matter of staying as informed as you or your group can be while going through the process that is government, and we're all government.
I want to make 2 points. Actually, so if you search for open data census, that's the first search result in Google will take you to the grid that I was talking about earlier. But to this question, I think in Oakland, we started Open Oakland a year before the Code for America Fellows showed up, and we built a community of people who, in the beginning, we're just meeting up regularly and discussing, not having any clear goal in mind. It's just building the network, building the relationships, having a few projects spin out. But it was very focused on events and gathering, and just people getting to know each other. And the following year, when the fellows came in, there was, I think, a lot of understanding of the community had already been discussing these ideas for a while. And I think what the great thing that the fellows provide is that they are able to bring that conversation to a national level, to connect with people in other cities, to get a sense of, to have new people thinking about these problems from slightly different perspectives, because maybe the solution or the problem that you think you have right now might not be the best project or endeavor at that moment. So I think just being open and allowing for the exploration process to happen, I think is where I've seen a lot of the fellows be able to do their best work. Actually, just to reinforce the point that Yo-Yo made about the adopt-a hydrant example, was that was not a project that the city even knew that they needed or that they even wanted. It was only because the fellows were there during a big blizzard. they heard conversations about firefighters not knowing where the hydrants were during blizzards, so fires became a big hazard. And it was only after having these conversations that the team thought, hey, we can build something on this, and that happened later on, late in the year. So I think it's just having a community of people who are interested in exploring this topic and also being open for allowing different ideas to develop is, I think, the way I've seen it work out best for a lot of cities.
So my next question is, what should be the first type of open data that we should go and be interested in? Should we try to create an app that's easy to use and is usable in the public, but doesn't necessarily solve all the problems in the world, but it's very user friendly? Or should we find a set of data that's just sitting there and it's the easiest one to publish? I mean, is it more important to get the data out there, or is it more important to put it in a graphic user interface that we can all use?
I mean both sides. So accessing it, but for a community that's just touching on this, they're not ready to start pumping out all their data into the Socratas and the Excelas, which are the main database systems that are the most popular ones right now in the market, and there's some open ones as well. It's starting again, as I said, it's starting with a project or a pain point. We're working right now with most of the region and in the disaster space, and that's something that everyone can come together on and use some of those types of data sets. With our neighborhood score, with our Rec and Park app, we built a platform for park facilities and park benches and information and ticketing and all that type of stuff. Start with something that exists, that's not going to ruffle anyone's feathers, and kind of move it forward, because it's something your community needs, and it will kind of go from there, I think. There's no definitive answer here, but I'm going to let you guys open that up.
Yeah, I think it's more of an art than a science. It's hard to really. Different cities have taken different approaches. Different governments have taken different approaches. So I think it really depends on the issues that are in the city, and sometimes the biggest issue might not be the best thing to start out with, right? Because the data might not be available. It could be a much more complicated issue than you might initially thought. But I think starting out small, I think ultimately the community that is built is more important than the apps. The apps are they're just a taste of what the potential can be. But maybe it's hard to build technology that is going to be sustained long term. But I think it's just a question of trying to understand the conversations. I think there should always be a greater goal with every project. If it's an app, the idea is not that it will go viral and take over the world, but that it brings people together, it sparks a conversation, that there's it lets people just get to know each other. And I think that's where the real potential comes. And through that, in Oakland, I've seen this as well. After a while, after after these relations have been built, I think you're able to start thinking more ambitiously about what can be done. But I think that it takes time, and it requires relationships.
When I reflect upon a city like San Rafael in terms of access versus apps, we haven't done anything. Actually, no jurisdiction in Marin or even the county necessarily has done anything yet with data. So for me, access, to me, and that's what I'm advocating internally, is let's just put a data set out there and let's just see what happens, because it's going to be a little bumpy. There might be some failures. It might go differently than what we thought, but let's just see what that looks like. If there's an app created and then someone comes to us, we're not set up internally to deal with that. It could be the greatest app since anything, And if we can't respond on the internal side, the staff can't respond, then then it stops right there. But if we can put our toe in the water, so that's what I'm advocating for, is let's try to put a data set out there and let's just see what happens. Let's see what apps are created, or let's see what comes back, because I don't know, I haven't experienced that. I've read about it and I hear stories, but I want to see what that looks like. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I think it looks different everywhere, so there really isn't a prescription. It really is about having the courage to be able to step into the unknown and put something out there and support, try and support as much as you can to see if something can happen. And if it does, then I think it's a great conversation starter for what else could be done. And I think that's the way it should be approached, is thinking about just having a conversation and letting this develop to eventually, the first app is just the beginning of what could be a big shift in the way that people relate to their government as more people start thinking about engagement and transparency in a completely different way. And I think that's the spark is what's needed initially.
I think to get that spark in Marin, it's a matter of the people who are interested in doing this thing, finding a data set, and if you can't find a data set, ask for one, and again, expect slow and steady responses and be ready for discussion. But there are a lot of data sets that are probably ready to be opened up. And it's a matter of finding that data set and then picking the simplest thing you can do with it that people can understand. So you find that simple solution that says, where are the fire hydrants in an emergency? And disaster response is a great place to look because a lot of people are interested in it. And once you build that simple thing with that singular data set, you'll find that more people will be in the game.
So I know several of the members of the public who are here are concerned about issues like many of us are in Marin. Sea level rise is one of them. The drought, the water situation affecting the whole state currently. And it's easy to ask someone, like, what do you care about and what's the thing that we need to be worried about? Underrepresented communities participating in the democratic process is another one. So they have these passionate things that they're passionate about, and Trent is saying that they need to go out and find a data set. It's almost like they need to know a data set when they see one. So maybe this is for Yo, concerning sea level rise. Like if someone is passionate about sea level rise, what should they go out and look for in Marin, online or at a town hall somewhere?
So there's some of these data sets already exist. We already built this into our disaster platform. We actually have them in, I think, the up to 20 feet sea level rise. So some of these are federal data sets that have already been done. They've come in, NOAA and all the agencies come in, and they publish them online for you to be able to access. It's what your community's doing with them is what the most relevant part, I think, of your question is we know that you're in a flood zone, right? We know certain parts of Sauce. I was born in Marin, so I know Marin pretty well. I know where certain flood zones are, and they've always been flooded. But as we look at climate change, we look at sea level rise, we look at drought, we look at where the water tables are going to be or not be. Are we making informed decisions at that point? Are our leaders, our civic leaders, making decisions based on that information, or are they just signing another? Are we putting our police assets? Are we putting our emergency assets in areas that we know in 2 years have a very good chance of being underwater? Or when the floods come in, they're going to be destroyed. So it's asking the question is, what are they doing with those data sets? And then giving the opportunity to be able to take the local data sets, like where your police stations are, where your fire stations are, where your emergency resource. I believe in Marin County has a CERT program, which is Community Emergency Response Team. Where are all of these different things in relevance to, and are you using those to make those decisions at City Hall? And one of that's what my company does, is we visualize that for members of City Hall and for the individual citizen, so that you can empower and educate yourself. Where are your evacuation routes? All of these things should be publicly available data sets that have been created, but they're not being published in the capacity within the community, for the community.
I also think it depends on the topic. It's interesting that you picked sea level rise. That's actually another interest of mine, and I attended a meeting yesterday, and we talked only about sea level rise. And that data is getting forced out there more. Some of the other issues that you talked about, I'm not quite sure what those data sets would look like, how you would help underserved communities have their voices heard. That's interesting. I would love to figure that out. In terms of sea level rise, Marin Climate Energy Partnership, go online and they have they've taken data. You can click the carbon emission in your city. You can look at the amount of water they're using, all sorts of things. So that data is starting to come out there. BCDC has sea level rise maps, because that is a science I think that's gotten everybody's attention. And so those ones are more likely to have the data, and individuals can start responding to it. In terms of the ones that are harder to define, I don't know what that would look like. I mean, I'd be curious to hear what they have to say about that.
I just wanted to really quick, sorry guys, to touch on the underserved. So we've been working in the Bayview in San Francisco, which, as most people know, is one of the most underserved neighborhoods. And they're using data, they're using community, and they're using technology platforms like ours and some others to bring the community together and find where those pain points again are, and work towards solutions for them. And they're getting actually traction for the first time in a couple of years. They've been doing these programs and throwing money at Bayview, and you're starting to see, because the community can actually see what's going on, and they know what's going on, and the city officials are showing up now and saying, we actually are starting to get some sort of traction and move these things forward. And something that Code for America did, and I hope you touch on this in greater depth, and something we did with San Francisco Kids, which is kind of the family services section of SF Kids, is we took all of that information, we put it into place, those data sets, and we're able to, families were able to easier access to the relevant services that they need, they can send the vulnerable to the appropriate places to get health care, all of those things. And I know that Code for America has been heavily entrenched on working with those types of data sets to better serve underserved neighborhoods or community members.
One of the things that I'd like to see happen is people who wouldn't talk about their data with each other start talking about it and look at things like sea level rise in relation to underserved populations, in relation to health outcomes in those neighborhoods. You start to see a lot of patterns when you look at data that you may not look at, and you can start to predict what might happen when things change. And you can also start to change discussion to focus funds and energy to where you suddenly realize as a community it needs to be focused.
Can I just get a quick show of hands of everyone who wants to speak to the panel or use the public open time, just so I know how to budget our time usage here? Okay. Okay, handful, all right. And based on how many we have, we'll define how long each person can talk for. We're getting close to the period when I was going to shift over, but I have a lot of questions here. One is concerning licensing. Could open data be licensed? Is that like a misnomer, or is open data by default public domain? And what's the difference there? Have some cities chosen to go with a license, or if you're an open data policy, you have to have it be in the public domain, and as far as that legal status goes?
I think it's an oxymoron, if I'm using oxymoron, because so open data by definition is open for everyone to access. We've come across some cities thinking we're going to profit from this, and all of those policies failed miserably. And because, I mean, we're not going to pay you for the data that the community's already paid for by giving you the job to collect that data. So it kind of falls flat from what I've seen, just experience-wise, and I don't support that at all. There's been some situations too, as private companies taking in the data sets and then keeping them for themselves, and trying to charge them back to the city or charge them back to other companies to use, which has created tremendous lawsuits and turmoil. So if you're going to do an open data policy, do not license it. Make it an open data policy so my 12-year-old kid can go in and create a cool little app, or all the way to a company be able to create industry and jobs within the community.
There's a lot of concern about how that data is handled and managed in any organization, and that's where the licensing might come in. The county or a city may not have the staff on hand to handle a very open policy and license, and they may choose to go with a company that is the lowest bidder or is the bidder that fits best, and that bidder may have a closed license on the system they use to publish that data. So you can believe in open data as truly open, but the application of it, the getting to it and the publishing it, can have complications that you may not consider until you put your foot in that door.
So California recently, the California Supreme Court ruled that parcel information has to be made available at the cost of reproduction, which is close to nothing. There was this big lawsuit from the Sierra Club suing, I believe it was Orange County, who was charging them hundreds of thousands of dollars for parcel information, and this was something that just recently passed or was ruled. And so as of now, there's a lot of information, like parcel and geographic information, which is there cannot be many restrictions on how it is made available. So I think in terms of the spirit of open data, it's the idea is that it is made available to the public to be used. There might be some cost of reproduction, but it's considering that so much information is digital and so easy to reproduce, it's often negligible. So at least that's the current state of affairs right now in California.
Would a city or maybe the whole county, if they were to consider adopting an open data policy, does that mean that they have to hire more staff? I mean, Trent mentioned it a little bit, but is there a way to do this without having an IT department in every town in Marin? Because most, I don't know which ones do and which ones don't, but I know not all towns and cities here have actual IT staff. So is that going to cost, city staff salaries that don't currently exist?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. If you're adding a new something, be it a person or a requirement to a job, you're either adding it on someone's current job or you need to bring someone in. And I know in San Rafael, that's something I've been working on for the last 2 years, is to have someone internally driving this issue, this initiative of what does it look like to have open data and how do you become more transparent. We're really lucky in San Rafael because we have a phenomenal director of library. Her name's Sarah Houghton, and she has spent her weekends and her evenings helping me as well as staff to create a resident engagement plan which has all that. That's in addition to her entire other job. So I think there are ways to go at it, but to me, it's not just saying data is available. It's actually to have it truly be successful, there has to be an internal philosophical shift in terms of an employee of the city or county is thinking how they're empowered to use that data or how they're empowered to share it across silos. That's not going to happen just because you hire someone. That is about relationships, that's about conversations. And so, yeah, I think you do have to hire someone. And an idea of hiring or sharing across communities is interesting as a shared service. There has to be an internal component. But again, we're in uncharted territory here, so we could think about how could you share that. But in terms of San Rafael, I've been advocating, working very hard to bring someone in to have that mindset and to have that special set of skills, because no one on staff right now is trained and has that approach. So.
Well, I think there's a subtext to what you're saying, which is the impact on city budgets or local budgets, and the idea here is that you might require somebody whose role it is to be the initiator of a lot of these policies, who's leading this. I think that's possible, but in terms of the long-term impact on the city, having employees, for example, having to fulfill public records requests over and over again, and having to repeat similar tasks over and over again, where this could be made available automatically, it can have a big impact on the burden of existing city staff to be able to have more time to not just be fulfilling public records requests. So, I mean, it's in terms of what this means for the government to be able to do their work in the long term, bringing in this person or having a plan to be making more information available, can, and in the cases that I've seen, have a bigger impact on city staff's available resources and what they're able to use their limited time with. So I think that's something that I wouldn't get too hung up on the idea that the initial investment, and they might require an initial investment. I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Well, I mean, you're starting to see the more progressive cities and around the world actually adopting chief data officers, which are very relevant. They're the ones that become the center point of educating the different departments on what it means and how they should be adopting it and kind of creating that policy. So I think someone to drive is important. But as far as my experience goes, and a lot of the resources working with Department of Public Health in San Francisco, actually was just calling me, it was not outside of their scope. The only problem was the biggest thing was some of their staff was cleaning up their data a little bit before it gets published, and that was a fear. So the setting up sort of standard format. But what happens is moving forward, you're obviously at a cost saving. You don't have disastrous data sets, and you have again, it's infrastructure, right? It's creating that baseline infrastructure, and with any infrastructure, you need leadership. And you need participants, but you're not having to, these people are already hired to be entering this data, right? So now we're saying, okay, well, we're going to take a little bit of time, but we're not going to take you away from your core job. Your core job is to enter this data anyways. Let's just make sure we have a standard format. We start looking at standards, templates, getting the information in correct so that when it comes out, it can be used accordingly.
There's high potential for high expense on the government side when a community asks for a change in how data is presented. There are ways to change that, and one you hope happens internally is that culture change. And I've been seeing it happen. I came in, there was no real Linux use, there was no open source code use in the county, and I started using it. I said, let me do this little thing. And that little thing worked really well, and it worked very quickly, and it was very cost effective. So now I have many, many of those tools, and more people are interested in using them. And to add to that, the County of Marin has a very strong volunteer program. So there are ways to come in and do work and help foster that culture change if you don't feel comfortable doing it at a public forum.
Do you guys think that there's precedent out there for a local brigade that's forming, or maybe a Code for America fellow getting placed somewhere to help liaison with staff if they may not have an IT person, just to kind of bridge that gap until to get the infrastructure in place to have an open data policy? I mean, is that something that a Code for America fellow could even do?
They do a lot of interesting things, I'll tell you that.
I think it's I think it's hard to say. I would like to think that in Oakland we've had that impact where we've been able to actually through the Open Oakland network. Now we have a bunch of people who are serving in different commissions and are now embedded within City Hall. And I think that that's, so we're seeing there being more tight collaboration between the city and Open Oakland and Code for America in general. And I think that that's definitely possible, but I don't know if that's something that you can, I think it just requires the right people to make it happen. I don't know if there's any way you can force that to happen. So I would bank on not relying on that, and instead to think about what is, how you can actually build infrastructure, how can you actually build support. And that is long-term going to be much more reliably successful than just hoping that someone is able to do it on their spare time.
And to go back to an earlier point that I had made, it's about education and having people understand, or having a city understand why they would even want a Code for America fellow as part of their institution, and starting to have that conversation. And that does come down to building the relationships. And it's so interesting because we're talking about data and technology and these things that all happen, out there, and yet the building blocks always come back to the human interaction and having those conversations and having the relationships. If someone comes and knocks on the door of City Hall in San Rafael and says, "Hey, I'm here, let me help you out," we wouldn't know what to do. We're not there yet. And it's very different talking about Oakland or some of the other cities, Boston or Chicago, that are much bigger and more mature cities. Looking at smaller cities, and that's what we have here in Marin, there has to be a huge education component. So I just have to reiterate that.
Yeah, I mean, from the business side, and my it is sustainability, and it has to be, and leadership driving this, and whether or not, because when we started in this, no one was educated. We had a guy named Phil Ginsberg who was the general manager of Rec and Park, who really wanted a mobile app and had open data sets and wanted to know where everything was and wanted the community to be able to engage, and it became about him saying, absolutely, we need this. We need to open our data sets, so not only this company can work with it, but there is now, I think, 15 other apps, Mom app, and everything else tied to that, and seeing the vision of what the future of the infrastructure is going to be, and driving those resources and having them actually become part of the embedded system. It's not just an outside person coming in on a temporary basis. It might get someone in just to consult, but you can reach out to the existing community to say, hey guys, can you come into City Hall and meet with all of the county management so that they can start getting a grasp of what the examples are and how they're being practically applied, and then get them excited to start moving this forward.
Okay, well, I'd love to open it up to the public now, so I think the best way to do is just make a line over here. That would help the panelists see you, and then we can do it in order. Hi.
I just have a couple of quick comments. My name's Dave Curry, and I am a proponent of fair and affordable housing. And I was really glad to hear that the egregious charges for parcel data had been taken away. I've tried to get that CD many times, and it felt pretty frustrating to have to go to send money to San Diego just to get information on my county. But there is actually, on the federal government side, I'm not sure if it's how similar it is, but it is an assembly, a consolidation of data for the consolidated plan, specifically for underserved populations. And it's a brand new data suite that's on board. I've tried to get the county to provide training to the public to access that database. The consolidated plan is being prepared now, and it would be great, as the county is right for the federal programs. The county acts as the countywide agency, including San Rafael, and at least 9 of the other cities. I think Nevada has their own CDBG department. But for the analysis of impediments to fair housing and for the consolidated plan, which are related, there is a cumbersome but new data set that's available. two other pieces of question. One is that a lot of the data about resource use is actually in private hands, PG&E, for example, or MMWD. And in terms of confidentiality of data, to me, it's BS. I'm not looking to see when you brush your teeth. I'm looking to see what the distribution of use is across types or across neighborhoods or correlated with other types of information and access to energy and access to water. You know, one hypothesis you could test is that 80% of the water is used by 20% of the households. Is that true? I've tried to work with MMWD to answer that, but because of the power structure, it's difficult to break that out. Those people who are heavy water users or resource users also have clout in how the data is used.
You know, statewide, just to interject real quick, statewide, it's a major problem. We wanted the data sets. It's not just a Marin thing. I
didn't think so.
I've been advocating for water usage, not to the individual household per se, but you know where the water tables are in certain areas. A lot of this stuff
Well,
is
the
really
farmers don't want you to see that either.
yeah, it's really locked down. So I mean, these are the things that, you know, this is something that you can get excited about, and you can start really bringing together other people to say, hey, we have a problem with water usage, we have a drought going on. This is something we can come in and say, this is what we can do to solve this, or we can find solutions.
We need rational and effective policies.
Yeah.
Unless you have the right data, you're not going to know if the policies are either of those.
Right, and that's something you can totally engage with your civic leaders to say, hey, we want the data first so we can make these informed, rational decisions.
Great. Thank you very much. Great meeting.
Hi, Bruce Bagnoli. I've worked in open data for a long time and transparency in government. I think transparency is the best preventative against corruption and also the best way to get good decisions. I want to commend this County of Marin for using open source, Drupal, for example, and you being a DevOps person. Certainly you know that software set, among many open source sets, makes it relatively easy to provide feeds to the public as long as it's planned in from the beginning. And one of the things that's necessary to make that work is, I think alluded to by our previous speaker, the public has to know what that data set contains. And so that has to be published as well. And so when things are planned that way and built with this sort of database approach and with the open source in mind, it's relatively low cost to make those data sets available. It may be very high cost to maintain a data set if it isn't done that way, but now that we're in this era, it is very straightforward to do it because getting good data in is so important. And as somebody who moved a very large billion-dollar government accounting system from one system to another, I can tell you that once you start looking at a data set, the ugliness of what is actually going on inside becomes clear. The County of Marin had a horrible experience discovering that clerks were using fields that were described one way to store all kinds of other data that they found useful that no one found out about until they tried to move it from one place to the other and then went, oh my God, the system doesn't work. So that's one of the things that happens when you make things public, is suddenly these things are exposed.
Yep.
And that's a good thing. There's no manager around who has the time to sit around and pick at everybody. So you have to build in good data coming in. It's the oldest thing we ever said since punch cards, and I'm that old. You have to have good data come in to good data come out. And so I really thank you for the approach that you brought to the county. It's long overdue. There's a lot of open source software out there that is license free. If the data is made available, then government is creating value. And just recently in my work in land planning, I was able to use a CAL FIRE data set that showed where all the timber harvest had been around this particular piece of land that we're working on. And I was able to bring in a data set from the National Marine Fisheries about the watershed. And that we didn't have to pay anything extra for. That's where government's creating value. And then as that data set is updated over time, people in the community find uses for it, and companies, marketing companies do. So I think it's a way for government to create value and also to give back what they've taken. So thank you.
More questions or comments from the public?
I wanted to introduce myself to you and the folks here. My name is Fred Vogler. I'm the Geographic Information Systems Manager at County of Marin. And we specialize in spatial data, meaning digital maps. And we have an enormous amount of mapped content for Marin County. We also design web applications to make this information comprehensible to the public as well as to professionals. And those are out there on the web right now. We release all of our data in an ISRI shapefile format, but if there are open source standards for spatial data, we can publish those. We can also publish our map services in open standard formats, KML, WMS, whatever hackers and coders want. You can use those in your apps if you want to communicate map-based information or do mashups by adding whatever spatial data and other content you have to a spatial data background. It's all there, public domain. We have a lot of San Rafael data in our database. We also, my team works with a consortium of public agencies called Marin Map, of which San Rafael is a member. We collaborate on data development, editing, sharing, web app development, and so forth. Check out their website, marinmap.org. Our spatial data is downloadable from their website, and we have samples of applications on their website. Some are generic, some are topic-focused, such as FEMA floodplains and so forth. And for the county, we have, again, some topic-focused ones like sea level rise, zoning and general plan information, and so forth. So there's a lot out there now, and during this coming calendar year, I was able to get one more staff person, and so we're going to be releasing quite a bit of web and mobile applications using the data we have, plus whatever else we can get a hold of during the year. So you're welcome to come up and ask about it. I'm giving my email and so forth. And for those of you who are coders, I definitely would like to talk to you about the formats and structures we use in the open source world. We're not that familiar with it because it's a corporate shop. Microsoft, Esri.
Esri?
Yeah, counties do not want to invest in open source. I don't know why. They don't. You are an exception.
I implanted myself.
Yeah. The downside is that if you get by a truck, what happens?
Fortunately, with popular open source tools, there are many, many people who are familiar with them. And as long as you're not hacking them apart in your implementation, somebody else can walk in and know it just as well as a Microsoft person can walk in and know Windows Server.
Thank you, Fred. Another speaker from the public?
Actually, just a quick thought on that. Shapefiles are great. And services. So I'm familiar with both, and I think that's pretty standard. And I've seen a lot of cities and counties publishing shapefiles. A lot of the open source tools that I use and I'm familiar with all support shapefiles.
Hi, can you explain the fellow program, or how does it work?
The
The
fellowship?
fellowship?
Yeah. So it's a year-long program. People from all over the country apply. Tends to be mid-career folks, and they leave whatever they were doing previously. So people ranging from people who worked at Google and Apple to City of Boston or City of Pittsburgh or urban planners apply, and about 20 or 30, depending on the year, get accepted. They all fly out to San Francisco. They get some training, and then are put in cities across the country. So the cities also have to apply, and counties recently as well have been applying. The fellows are matched with cities, and for the cities, it's a very competitive process. I think it's like 30 or 40 cities apply or local governments apply every year, and only about 8 or so get in. And the fellows are matched with the cities, and they're there for 1 month in February for an intensive period where they get to talk to anyone, from the mayor to community groups to city staff. They propose ideas. They get buy-in. So that it's not just technical. It's not just people who know how to build stuff. It requires a bit of savviness and being able to understand the context in which they're operating in and seeing opportunities. And they have a full year to develop some tool, technology, service, whatever it is that they see themselves, whatever talents they have, or help pass open data laws. And then the fellowship year is over, and often what you see happen is that fellows get hired by cities, they join other cities. It's a way of bringing in a lot of new, fresh talent inside government. So actually a bunch of previous fellows, the current chief data officer of San Diego was just a fellow last year. The chief data officer of the city of Pittsburgh was a fellow 2 years ago. The current chief data officer for LA was a staff member of Code for America. So it's bringing in a lot of new energy inside cities, which are then also, I would say that the biggest long-term impact is not the tool or the technology, that the city may or may not continue to support it long-term, but often it's a catalyst for culture change, where there's generally an acceptance, for example, or of experimenting with different tool sets, different processes, things like user-centric design, and conducting interviews before you build any new applications, or using open source tools. And those are the kinds of long-term changes that Code for America has had. It's currently in its 5th year, so it's pretty established, and it has a broad network across the country of cities who are now connected to each other, who've all had this experience, who share ideas with each other. And as the fellowships and groups like this emerge through the country, there's a discussion that's happening with people from all over the country. So if you go to Chicago or New York, you can find the local brigade there, the Code for Chicago or the Code for. So it's created an incredible network of people across the country who are interested in these kinds of topics.
My name's John Ortega, and I'm going to ask the board about the decisions that you're all concerned about, specifically the election system, which we don't participate in nationally or locally or ethnic-wise, at least in the last election. Los Angeles had about 20% voter turnout in the mayor's election last year, 2 years ago. And my point I'm making, I'm trying to make, right? I'm saying we participate in decision making and really look at decisions, how we make them. Who runs our government? Who runs our city council? Who runs our board of supervisors? And I say there's special interest groups that run everything. And the item the city council might be small business. They have a vested interest in how the city's run. So their voice through the chamber is going to be heard a little bit more than other voices. Rent control, affordable housing, these are things that are off the table as far as I'm aware in the city of San Rafael. The other points that I'd like to bring out is there's money involved in all these things in decision making. And this money really bites down. The reality is that millions of dollars are spent on voting. It doesn't make any difference what party. They're both eating out of the same trough anyhow. But the point's still there that the money, that's what really runs our government. My own personal experience with this happens to be about 30 years ago when I was a representative of a Mexican organization in Sacramento as a lobbyist. And I was in this little bar across the street from the Capitol at 1 o'clock in the morning. And this fellow who was very, very drunk, he used to call me Goody Two-Shoes because my legislative portfolio consisted of unemployment for farm workers and education bills like that. So he said, this is what he said now. You are shoveling shit against the tide, Goody Two-Shoes. And I was there, this is my second year I was there. So this little bar was a hangout for lobbyists. He represented a special interest group of a bank. And he says, as he hit the bar with his fist, he says, I'll tell you where it's at, Goody Two-Shoes, finance and insurance, that's where it's at. Well, finance and insurance was a committee of 14, 15 people that represented the finance, the banks, the insurance companies. Anything to do with money goes through finance and insurance committee, the state assembly.
Can I make one just quick interjection here? So the data sets around finance and something that one of the cities in Marin actually has been very progressive is Sausalito. So different data sets, and the state of California has been dominating. One of my friends has created a company called OpenGov, who takes financial data and makes it very transparent. So something you might want to advocate to help figure out where the dollars are coming from, and two, is advocating for the adoption of these very reasonably priced software programs that can then be used by people like you, advocates, who want to go out and take that data and try to shape the future of where those dollars might be allocated.
Thank you. I didn't get to the first slide yet.
Oh, sorry.
You got the right first slide?
We left out at pushing poop into the
Punchline
tide.
is, this fellow said, I can buy and sell everybody on that committee. That's the punchline. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, John. Anyone else from the public? I think we've got time for maybe one more 10-second question.
No, I just wanted to thank you all for coming. Really, and Trent, I'm so glad there's someone in the county like you. I didn't know you existed, so this is a big score for me today. And it's always great to hear Kate, and I'm so glad that there's people on the city council that are on top of this. And our two external guests, thank you very much. I've talked to a lot of city staff already about some of these issues, and I know there's a lot of obstacles out there. You reiterated a lot of them today. And people, the people who are in the know are trying to figure this out. So I think having more public awareness and friendly pushes, and trying to get this in the right direction is really key. And I'm really glad to see some people on the inside that are already thinking about this. So
Just one quick thing, sorry I speak a lot, is if you are a city official, most companies that are in this space want to nurture this environment, and it behooves us and it behooves you. So we're happy to come in and show you examples of how it can work, and sometimes even take some of the existing data sets that are already in the city, and you can walk in and put them up on a presentation. And I've done this, and I know some of my colleagues have done this with other companies, so that you have something tangible to bring in when you have the conversation, so that you can help educate and help them understand in a real way.
Well, thank you very much, Kate, Eddie, Trent, and Yo, for being here. I also want to thank the town of Fairfax and the Parks and Recreation Commission for hosting us here. And I also want to say thanks to Sarah Houghton, who's in Hawaii right now, Well deserved, well deserved. She's part of our Code for Marin group, and that group, if you're interested, I think you can hit us up with your email on the way out. If you want to get more updates, you can also follow us at Code for Marin, 4 being FOR, not the number, Code for Marin. I'm sorry, yeah, Twitter, and then the website is codeformarin.org. And we're taking small steps forward. Thank you all for coming.